Hi, Linda. To all the questions you asked, I was going to do something about work separately in a minute, but I know you were talking about changing your timelines, and that's something you wanted to do because the one you're in right now, you feel really stuck by. And I identify. I'll just share with you what I've discovered as far as my own inability to successfully, and I use the word successfully in complete parentheses, change my timeline without finding that I just revert back to the old timeline. And it has to do with the fact that, how can I even say this? It's very easy. If you saw it a little bit like, say, using the internet, it was given to me yesterday as the internet was an example. There is a myriad of different things that we could connect into, subscribe to, and read and follow. That's kind of like our timeline. And we choose those based on our story, our energy, our signature, everything. So we attract what we feel validates us, what we enjoy, etc. What defines us. That's what we attract to. So if we suddenly randomly decide, I don't want to be this anymore, I want to be this, and then we start immediately being something else, sometimes that's 100% successful, and we can actually totally take on a whole new identity, whole new persona, and move forward. However, inevitably, there's that old patterning, unless it's gone, that keeps drawing us back to the former identity, the what we were, how we expressed ourselves. And so how do we step from one identity to the other successfully? By having no identity, is what I was shown. Now, how do we get to a point of no identity? Well, that's really the crux of where we struggle. It has to do with what we believe we receive. Can we completely give up an old belief and embrace a new one? Often when we move. Another example is when you live in an environment, you live in a town and you have a ton of friends, and then one day, I don't know if it happens to everyone, it used to happen to me a lot because I'm a gypsy who constantly moved. Suddenly you're like, oh, I'm done, I need to move. And you move. And for a little while you stay in communication with some of your former friends, but then you begin to make new ones and a whole new life takes over, and then you no longer communicate with anyone that you were formerly friends with until Facebook, and now you can keep track of people, but then eventually you, unless there was a really deep friendship, like as in a soulmate or a group soul level, then you stay in contact. But if not, then eventually you just, I just lose contact. There's very few people I've stayed in contact with my whole life. So there's two different ways of looking at it. You asked me about my job. I haven't left my job, even though my logical mind wants me to, because I'm not done with the patterning. So whatever I'm working through, I will just take with me to wherever I go, because what I'm doing is letting go of a way of being in third density. And it's one thing to travel up to fifth density and hang there, but the pathway I'm carving is bringing fifth density into third density, not going from third density into fifth density. I'm trying to create a pathway so that fifth density can eventually become a choice to many for third density. And in the mass consciousness, not just individuals that are already encoded to wake up at this time. The majority of humans are not coded to wake up at this time. They're comfortably still snoozing deep in the planes of shame and blame and disassociation. It has nothing to do with me. I'm the victim or I'm at fault. And that's where I'm focusing. So a lot of what I'm seeing and perceiving is to help shift that in the mass consciousness. And there was a very big pattern that I found. And it has to do with love, oddly. Love. Where we love somebody so much that we start trying to influence them in lieu of honoring their own choice. We start to begin to govern and hold space for or push our knowing onto them in lieu of them not having knowing. And it seemed like the only option we had is to come in and impress our will on their will, ever so subtly, but to the point that we began to enable people, as in, I will help carry you, rather than saying, this doesn't resonate as true for me, and I don't want to hurt your feelings by standing up for my truth and telling you, I think you're making a big mistake, or I think you're wrong, or I think that, this might end in our friendship dissolving. Instead, we make do. And we, rather than stepping into the expression of our truth, we edit our truth to not trigger, upset, harm, or displace others because we feel we're cradling them and keeping them safe. And ultimately, we suffer. And because we're manifestors and we are awakening, we then anchor that pattern into mass consciousness. Look what I'm doing. I'm the martyr. I will give my life for you. I will sit in a situation that I resent because I don't want to upset anyone. I want to be the peacemaker. I want there to be harmony and happiness. That was me at work. That was me at work. I won't tell you that what you're doing right now sucks because it will upset the flow of everyone else. You will become triggered. You will become hostile. And so therefore, I will just appease you and allow you to continue with a pattern that doesn't serve. It was at the expense of myself. It was giving my power away to others to wield, to hold peace. Didn't pan out. Didn't pan out. So the day history rewrote itself at work was the day that I realized that instead of giving my power away to others to make them feel happy, to enable them, and it was across the board. It was across the board. I had different behaviors for different people within my life. Every single person in my life, I didn't want to trigger. I didn't want to trigger them. Ultimately, I didn't want to trigger myself. And so I made peace. I was the peacemaker. I negotiated. I consented. I backed down. I was in survival mode. I'm trying to get to that first will. In survival mode, as I saw in my life history, you don't blaze forward. You don't express your will. You survive around other people's energy. And you learn to become a chameleon. You do whatever you need to in order to not stir up the peace, to not draw harm to yourself, to try and create harmony, and to try and make everyone around you feel as good as they possibly can. Enabling. And in that pattern, we suffer. And that's the pattern we've been anchoring into mass consciousness. So instead, I'm stepping into a selfish, seemingly selfish pattern of what gives me joy? How can I become an expression of who I am as I'm creating a template to bring my source into my skin, right down into the earth through my will center? How can I change my will spark from I serve, I subjugate, I subordinate into I shine, I thrill, I am this that I am, as are you. It's a fundamental shift. That's the timeline I'm shifting out of. the one of service to others, but not in the sense of, oh, service to others, service to self, because it seems as if you begin to take care of yourself. Is that service to self? Well, it might be, but how else do we change the landscape? How else can we stand as a radiant beacon of, I am this that I am. As a you can live like this and know peace and know joy and know creation. You can create from your power. Is it healthy power? If we have memories of creating with overpower, as we were moving the energy up from the will to the sacral, to the solar plex, to the heart, there was often the confusion of power. And then we moved up into the heart, and we were still overpowered because we hadn't mastered the solar plexus. And so it's complicated. But when you pull love, balanced knowledge, love, higher mind down into the solar plexus, suddenly the patterning reveals itself for what it is. Codependency. That in order to survive, we blended in. We didn't draw attention to ourselves. We didn't want to die. If we spoke up and expressed divine will, bam! I am this so that I am, off went our head. So there's nervousness, there's trepidation. However, for me, that is the critical thing that I'm dealing with right now, is the fact that I'm not going to give my power away at work anymore. I'm not going to give my power away in my life anymore. I'm not going to give it to one single living human anymore. I'm going to own my power and begin to create my reality from the inside out, rather than being a reflection of the outside in. That's how I'm changing my timeline. I'm not changing it in my mind. And all of this, you have to have, you have to step through linear mind. You can't create with linear mind. You can only create with linear mind in 3D. So therefore you have to study, you have to remember. All those are memory triggers that activate a pattern within you. It's like a series of doors that open. Every single door is critical to open. It's critical. And it's not necessarily a long line. Sometimes many doors can open in one memory. But you can't think yourself somewhere else. You can't. You can't. You have to restructure how you create and create a different reality to exist within. That's, to me, the changing of timelines. Hope it helps.